Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation. This is a bibliometric analysis of research on environmental causes of ALS. The objective of this research was to conduct a bibliometric analysis of the 100 most cited writings on Web of Science, the research database, going to environmental causes of ALS. To explain briefly what ALS is, it's one of the worst diseases in existence today, both because of its terrible prognosis and the lack of successful treatment for it. ALS causes motor neurons to deteriorate and eventually die, impacting one's ability to use their arms and legs to speak and to breathe. The disease is always fatal, usually from breathing failure. Half of people with the disease die within 14 to 18 months of diagnosis.
Treatments are very limited. None can actually reverse the damage caused by the disease. Some can slightly slow symptoms or prevent complications. 2 drugs used to treat the disease have been approved by the FDA, and only one actually increases lifespan, and that's by only about 25% of the very limited time spent from diagnosis. Causes of this disease have been identified and vary in terms of preventability. Those include genetics, age, sex, smoking, toxin exposure, military service, and occupation, and trauma to the head and spine. With preventable causes, we saw a very vague identification going into the items including toxins, smoking, injury, service in the military, and occupation. And so we saw a need possibly for more research in that area to try and identify more tangible items that can be avoided to help prevent the disease. To measure such efforts, we completed a bibliometric analysis using Web of Science, our research article database.
In order to find our sources for our research, we used Web of Science, where we searched the 3 key terms, environmental causes and ALS. We were then resulted with 835 sources, and then filtered those 835 sources into the top 100 most cited sources. Our analysis conducted of going through authorship, funding, author academic institution, and keywords, and alongside of these, we did a content analysis of the 10 most cited articles. After analyzing our sources, we were able to categorize them, and one of the categories being most used title keywords. What we found was that keywords relating to genetics were leading in terms of research, and conversely, keywords related to preventable causes or environmental factors were lacking. These areas can definitely be looked into further for ALS research. The authorship was also generally spread out, with senior authors having multiple papers of the top 100 most cited on Web of Science, with the exception of Petrusili having 8 writings who specializes in the causes of neurodegenerative diseases. We could also see that the research was similarly spread, with Mayo Clinic leading with 5, University College London with 4, University of Michigan with 3, and the rest of the institutions with 2 and 1. The journals were also pretty spread out, with several leaders leading the way. A few had 7 out of the 100 articles, one had 4, and overall the research was pretty spread out among publications.
When we analyzed the top 100 articles by year of publication, we found that all of the research was done fairly recently, mostly all within the 21st century. Some of the works were published this year, some within the last 10 years, and most all of them within the last 20 years. Most of the top 100 cited articles were predominantly made by researchers from the US and from European nations. The first metric or graph shows that the US was the leading nation for these publications with 43 articles. However, when we grouped all European nations together, we found that those countries exceeded the US with 53 total publications. Primary funding for the research was strongly led by the US, mostly through the US federal government. For instance, the National Institute of Health funded 19 of the 100 articles, with other U.S. funding institutions to follow. When examining the articles by region, we see that 74% were primarily funded by the U.S., and it was also primarily publicly funded at, again, 74% by the U.S.
Within the NIH, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke led heavily, contributing about 2/3 of primary funding for articles. In the aspect of the most common funding for ALS research, there were a diverse range of contributing sources, which were both public and private, about 50-50, And the most common funding came from US and Canada, which contribute about 2/3, followed by Europe and then Asia. In conclusion, current ALS studies are focused on genes, which are the biggest contributor to this neurological condition, and these research efforts are often funded by the US federal government, but some European and private efforts also contribute to these studies. And research on ALS is heavily cited across institutions in the US and Europe, both private and public, and ALS research is generally spread across a wide variety of journals.
A recommendation that we have is to focus more on a causative factors outside genes based on possible preventability. If you can get those sources more hover towards more specific causes that we can prevent, and furthermore going into the genes, we know of course the only way to avoid is pregnancy termination, which is of course a controversial topic and also one that is not necessarily plausible, requiring lots of genetic testing in the womb and also a clear link between that gene and ALS. There was a research article highlighted that the lack of this focus with title, keyword, subject analysis, and context analysis would be of the 10 most cited articles. When considering our limitations, the most significant one we faced was a reliance on the Web of Science for data. While this is a highly respected and well-known source, it tends to focus on articles published in English, which led us to question the inclusivity of our research, which was primarily based on data from the US and Europe. We felt it was important to involve more diverse sources, including articles from Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Spanish-speaking world concepts in our research to be more inclusive. Here we have listed is our 100 different types of articles from our data set, and I thank you for your time and are ready to end this presentation. Thank you.